can't really talk to it, but I just know that a guy that are we live? Oh, sorry.
We are. No, hello. This is how live streams tend to start because we're just chatting beforehand and having too much fun. But that's all right. We'll give folks a few minutes to hop in here too, so we can keep chatting. But
also, like, you served, Mike, so like Helldivers is definitely your thing. You could definitely lead other players in the democratic fight against space bugs and Terminator knockoffs.
I don't game a lot. I don't play a lot of video games. But a
That's
guy
fair.
that I went to Launchpad with actually worked on Helldivers, so as part of the story team.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't play Helldivers; you live it.
I got you.
Really the way that
Or live the frustration after the newest patches.
Oh my gosh. Well, you just have to. I just assume, for me, as my fan fiction for Helldivers, I just assume that the bugs and the bots are adapting. They've modified their armor now to resist fire. Okay, well, we're gonna have to deal with that.
Yes. They're learning at a geometric rate, or whatever the quote was for Skynet. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not gonna, game developers changing the way things work in the game. That's no fun to think about. I'll just think about the bugs doing. The bugs are adapting. Okay, we have to change our tactics.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Well, we've got some folks filtering in, so I'm gonna properly launch this thing off.
Sure.
So, hello, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the live stream. Today, we're chatting with some super cool people because we are celebrating the launch of Ronnie Virdi's newest book, The Doors of Midnight, sequel to the first binding, newest installment in the wonderful Tales of Tremaine series. So, joining me today, we've got Jim Butcher, we have Michael Mammay, and of course, the man of the hour himself, our Virdi. So, hello, how are all of you doing tonight?
Tired, but great.
Good. Congratulations, Ronnie, by the way.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations. This is a great book, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tired but good is the book launch vibe. So we have a pretty stacked crew on the call today. So I'm pretty sure the folks that are going to be watching probably already know who all of you are. But in case anyone out there isn't familiar with any of you, can we start with just some intros around the circle here? We'll start with the lovely Ronnie, because that's who everyone should be here to see. So yeah, just a little bit about yourself and your projects and all of that good stuff.
I'm Ronnie Virdi. I write as R.R. Virdi. I've predominantly written a lot of urban fantasy inspired by Jim, obviously. And then I am now doing an epic fantasy series, Tales of Tremaine, which is what we're here for, book 2, The Doors of Midnight, launching today. Grew up in Northern Virginia, mostly around like muscle cars and guys who hunted and stuff. So I'm kind of like a beige redneck.
There you go. What a descriptor. Muscle cars and guys who hunted. Love it. That's the vibe. Awesome. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm a sci-fi writer. My first series was a Planet Side series. My last book that came out was Generation Ship, and I think my 7th book comes out in September, and that's the 4th book in the Planet Side series, which I'm going back to for a second trilogy. So.
Woohoo! Nice.
Yeah.
And Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Butcher. I'm the author of the Dresden Files, Codex Alera, the Cinder Spires. I had a television show on the Sci-Fi Channel for about 5 minutes one year. So
I love it.
I still remember that. They gave Harry a hockey stick, if I recall.
They did.
Yeah.
At the time, there was a bit of a furor. We'll if it goes again, we'll see what happens. We'll see what goes on. So.
Right? Fingers crossed for a take 2.
Yeah. Or an animated. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's what I'd want. I really think that would be a really great way to go, an animated Dresden. That would be fun.
Absolutely.
That would be super cool. That would be awesome. I would love that. Yeah. Well, anyone that's watching out there, if you guys have questions, please feel free, drop them in the chat. For all of us here chatting, otherwise I'm just going to kind of kick things off and we're just going to be kind of vibing here. So, but let's start talking about The Doors of Midnight, because I feel like I've been on a few book launch parties where we get to like the 30-minute mark and we're like, well, shit, we haven't even talked about the book yet. So I'm going to make sure we don't do that. And I'm going to start us off. So we're here to celebrate it. Ronnie, let's start pitch our viewers here on the Tales of Tremaine for anyone that hasn't read the first binding yet. Tell them what they can expect from the sequel, just all of that good stuff.
So it was inspired actually by a love letter to both fantasy and then the history of comparative mythology, because that's what I'm like a big nerd for. And if I had the money to do college and didn't have good business sense, I would have probably pursued a PhD in mythology. But I learned very early that they don't make much money, and what college costs when I was going to college was a lot. But especially when I got into my 20s, I started realizing how much Proto-Indo-European mythology specifically influenced a lot of other cultures in the world, from similar gods to epics and beats. And I started seeing it more in my 20s back in the old fantasy I read. And I thought that was kind of cool, like how much we all shared in common. And as the world's been growing more divisive of late, I kind of thought it would be really beautiful. Can I just write a love letter to like fantasy I grew up with, but also just the idea of what fantasy and myths people traded along the world, because we clearly have a love of how stories are structured very similarly across the world. We love how our certain climaxes are paid off. We love certain aspects of our heroic epics and our epic poems. And I thought it could be really cool for me to do that along a fictional Silk Road. So Tales of Tremaine features a fake Silk Road. And there's a character named Ari, who's a protagonist, who sort of functions as a proto-hero, because a lot of what he goes through is what a lot of the old classic heroes through multiple cultures have gone through, but just set in an Asiatic lens. And he's telling the story in the present day to a singer he's falling in love with, because she realizes he's sort of emblematic of all these origin nesting stories, while he's also chasing one. So it has a storytelling convention, kind of like Gene Wolfe's Books of the New Sun or Forrest Gump, where there's a framed narrative, which was invented with the South Asian epic Mahabharata. And it's just a giant love letter to all of that. Like there's references to Greek stories, there's references to stories I love that are not mythological. Every one of my works to date has some kind of Dresden Files reference, just because that was a series I grew up with. So it's as much as a love letter to the art of storytelling as well as stories themselves, from beats and archetypes and tropes, and then also what things really meant a lot to me that I can put in as like a love letter to fantasy itself. Because I figured if my character's a storyteller, he should also have that love, because it adds that extra layer of like verisimilitude to him. Like it's true enough, you would believe someone who loves stories would also tell stories within the narrative and have little loving nods to other stories.
Yeah. It's amazing. I love that one. That's like
I rambled a lot.
No, but that's one of the things I very much love about the Tales of Tremaine is how deep and layered and how nuanced all of the different stories within stories and the nesting elements of it, or kind of nature of really the whole tale. It's just so intricate is the word that comes to mind when I think of the prose and how the narrative is put together, because it is so intricately woven. Makes me picture like just something that is just braided, one of those really complicated braid knots, right? Where it's beautiful, right? You're like, oh my God, I can't even begin to like conceptualize how one would braid this together. And that's kind of how I felt reading the tale, because it's just so well done. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a story about stories, right? I mean, when you break it down, that's really what it is. It's about how stories change and how stories take on lives of their own, and how different people hear the same story and get something different from it, and it gives them something, and it really, that's just woven all the way throughout as you see these stories. Where Ari is telling you some of the truth about those stories, but not always all of it, right? Because he's not completely reliable as a narrator, and he's giving you these stories. And the great part about it is each of the stories, or many of the stories that are in there, are just great stories on their own, right? So it's almost like you're reading a short story that's set inside of a story, but it ties together with the other stories. So it's like a nested short story that's inside of a story in a lot of the cases, where different people are talking about different myths and things. And the thing is that as you're getting that short story, you know that short story is coming back, right? That it's not there accidentally. He's not just telling you this story because he wants to tell you a bunch of stories, but that story is coming back into either the framing story or into the history story that he's telling to Elwyn. Yeah,
that was actually a technique I got from Tolkien, because over the breadth of his larger works, especially in when you look at Silmarillion, a lot of it is told stories about told stories as well, and like how the founding mythos of Arda, his world, which in Middle Earth is in, like all came to being. And I always thought that was kind of beautiful because a lot of storytelling, the more I started digging through, was so orally transmitted, and it started with people just around the fire. And I kind of like that conversational stories within stories tone, but they always were the original founding myths. So I felt like I needed that weight. But if I did what Mike said, like you didn't include it back into aspects of the story, then you're just telling stories for the sake of telling stories, which in real life is great. But like I was worried in terms of fiction that wouldn't work on its own. Like you need to have multiple payoffs. And that's something I learned from Jim, where he taught me something called emotional catharsis, where you have to pay off certain beats that may not even be your primary climax. But if you're doing something, why are you doing it? And at other points of story, when and how are you going to pay it off?
Absolutely. Yeah, I liked one of the things Michael said too about truth and Ari not always being the most reliable of narrators.
Yes.
I love that. And I love he's kind of openly not the most reliable of narrators.
Yes.
Because he openly says something that I think is very true and is very true for a lot of society, or all of society, is that like perception is reality, right? The kind of ephemeral nature of truth is very much a center point of the Tales of Tremaine in general. I kind of want to talk a little bit more about themes in the works, because I want to talk about like the themes and ideas that you wanted to explore with this book in particular, or the series as a whole. Like, if readers come away from either Doors of Midnight or the series as a whole with like one feeling, impression, message, something like that, if you can only pick one, or maybe two, I'll let you pick two. I usually let people cheat when I answer that, because it's hard.
Yeah.
What would it be? What would it be? Also, we have a note from a friend here, so just congratulations from our buddy here. So pop that on the screen for you.
Oh, it's from Gaurav. Okay, thank you, Gaurav. I appreciate that. I know who he is. Yeah. He actually wrote Sons of Darkness. I believe you guys have had him on SFF Addicts before. Okay, cool. Yeah. Wow, the theme question. I could take away one, and it's gonna nod back to the dedication in book one to Jim, for something he explained to me on a really rough night in my life, where he relayed like my life to a story, and who gets to write my story, and that being me. And a founding theme in this is that everybody's story is important, and in fact everybody is a story, right? Like, I know we don't treat people's lives as epics, but everyone's gone through ups and downs, and their lives are increasingly complex. Amazing things have happened and tragic things have happened, and in this fantasy I get to just dial it up to 11, right, adding fantastical moments. But nobody's life is nothing short of a story, and that every story matters, and everyone is playing a part in other people's story, which is why in this novel Ari takes time to try to like ask other people their stories, and you hear about it and you get glimpses. And obviously I'm giving like glimpses that serve the narrative, but it serves the point that even those moments in other people's lives are important. So be careful like how you interact with them, what you're taking away from someone else's life, because Ari's whole life and his legends are clearly snippets and moments that people have just continued to twist and twist like a game of telephone, like happens, until they reach these gargantuan, epic, legendary proportions where he's either a villain or a hero, and people have the capacity to be both to any different person in your life, depending on when they meet you and how they perceive their interactions with you to be, versus like you can just have a bad day and try to be nice to somebody, but maybe the tone is off and they're having a bad day too, and there's no communication further than that, but they can just interpret your tone as you being mean to them. And maybe it wasn't your best tone, but you were also having a hard day and you didn't mean it that way. And now two completely different stories exist. So I think the idea that everybody's life is a story and that story matters, is something I would like people to walk away with, because the series is quite literally built on that. And obviously the dedication to Jim, because my life has been very oddly emblematic of that, to the point where like everything he told me I could do, I almost ended up being able to do every single one of those things so far in terms of my career. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what you can do, Ronnie? You can win the lottery and split it with me. If that's the way, that's how it works.
Okay.
Can I get in on this lottery pool if that's what we're doing here?
Oh God, the news next week if I actually try and that happens.
Right.
Wow.
Then everyone's going to be coming to you, Jim, for
See,
for their own fortunes.
That would really make me rethink this whole simulation theory thing as well. So, yeah.
It's gonna be like Buddha, the blessing of Jim. You are the guy at the end of the Matrix.
Oh, okay.
Exactly what a guy at the end of the Matrix would make us think.
Yeah, he's going to be giving the spoon lesson at Dragon Con. There is no spoon.
That's exactly. That's it.
Well, I've been noticing you've been all over the place, chatting with folks and doing things to promote the release, as we all do in those lead up times, Ronnie. I want to ask, how has it been promoting the sequel or writing a sequel? Just because it's always a fun question, because promoting a sequel, I had such a hard time with it, because how do you promote a sequel without spoiling book one?
Oh yeah,
it's so tricky sometimes. But just how has that whole journey been for you? And writing the sequel, did you feel the pressure of the book two, the sophomore pressure thing, all of that?
No, actually, and I was very fortunate to be able to crutch on two people here, Jim and Michael, for different reasons. When writing book two, I had kind of been asking life for a sign to help me write a better tragic romance and stuff like that. And I kind of went through one of those in my real life while I was really manically excited to be writing book two. Yeah, definitely one of those moments, and a lot of
silver lining, I guess.
Yeah, mix it, but the pain and lessons I got, I was able to talk to Jim about, and he gave me some of the lessons, we talked about the emotional catharses, and I was able to channel them into fiction to write a better book two than book one was, because I do believe that this was the first time when writing it, I was really happy seeing everything I practiced with book one, getting lessons from Jim. I was in a better place to apply them, and there was this weird, I guess excited confidence in that, seeing myself growing more. Kind of became this perpetuating momentum. It just drove me further. Oh my God, I can see myself getting better, which was more of a reason to write. And as I wrote, I just kept getting better. So I actually had book two turned in before book one was out. It was early. The parts where things started getting scary was after book two's original draft was in. I didn't get edits for 6 months. My first editor was fired because he vanished on all of his clients. Nobody knew what happened. And then I didn't know what that was going to do. So the book was getting delayed through editing, and I didn't know what was going to change story-wise. That kind of kept me from writing book three, and which was a good thing, because we lost 70K words, which I understand too, because the print crisis going on right now. They're we physically cannot print this book. But it did make the book better. And I actually talked to Mike as well. He actually read some of the alpha, and because he was a fan of book one, and we talked on edits through that too. We cut it down. The writing was probably the easiest part. Promoting, like you said, was the most confusing, because I never knew how to promote a traditional book too, because it's also going to be available in new avenues. Since I'd never been in bookstores before, and I was doing a lot of online tours, which thanks for you and Adrian helped set up. And then the most shocking thing recently was learning how important bookseller meetings were. I'd never actually gotten to meet booksellers privately, at a function for booksellers only, and it was a completely different experience to normal conventions and stuff. Which makes sense, because they're the ones who actually get your books on shelves and give it to fans. And it was a completely different interaction, talking about how they sell books. I learned a lot, and it was staggering how they think about, especially indie bookstores, how they think about what books to market, what to sell, how they reach out, and how they actually communicate to readers themselves, which is very different than what I thought was normal, because I've only seen how publishers talk to readers. And it's very different between a bookseller than a publisher. And I honestly think booksellers are better booksellers, obviously, because they were teaching me tricks on how they communicate with their readers. They don't use a lot of the comp stuff. They actually use a lot more of why should you read it as a reader. So they actually break down the story stuff. But when you look at Twitter, publishers are doing that same trope graph where it's enemies to lovers and this and that, and they're just selling readers on tropes. And booksellers are that's gotten really tiresome. That works maybe on Twitter to X people, whatever social media reach you have, that diminishes. But in real life, people, they don't want to hear a trope chart, which I thought was really fascinating and interesting, because after so many years of watching traditional publishing doing that, there was a disconnect, and it taught me how to reach back out to readers in a better, more wholesome way. And I think it's worked. I think book two's been doing really well so far on the early promotion.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting too. I mean, of course, a bookseller is going to be, better at promoting in certain formats, but I do think it's a difference in the medium, right? Where it is different to, when you're promoting online, it's maybe a slightly different. I'm sure there's overlap, right, in the audience of people who buy books online versus people who buy them in store. But it's very interesting. It's for viewers and listeners that don't know, I'm a marketer in my day job, so these things just kind of tickle my interest in a kind of nerdy way.
Right.
Let's see. We got a few more greetings and happy book birthdays from the chat.
Thank you, Bob.
So I'll throw these up so that we can all be saying hello. And I'm also going to throw my own message up on the chat in case anyone's not looking at the chat. But if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and I'm highlighting that now. So there you go.
Longest so far without smolder comments, so I'll take it. We're 20 minutes in.
Right.
It's coming.
Yeah. We must be missing the normal roasting crew so far. Maybe they're en route back from Glasgow or something.
Stuck in traffic, yeah.
Crew. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Well, what about you guys, Jim and Michael? What are your thoughts on, the promotional sequence for books? Any challenges or tips or anything that you've seen?
The first thing I always say, like other writers, when it comes to stuff like this, is the best thing you can do to promote your book is to spend more time working on it and making it good. That at the end of the day, you can appear on the internet, you can do flyers, you can do advertisements, you can do whatever you want. But what will really sell your book is having a good story that people will say, like, oh, I got to have my friend read this so that we can talk about it. That's what's really going to sell it. So if you can really reaching out to people and being able to if you can actually get them emotionally invested in your stuff, that does more to sell, I think, than almost anything else. I could be wrong. You're my origin
definitely
story
right.
A different age of publishing. So
but that's the advice I stuck to. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the biggest thing I learned with the first Binding sales was that it wasn't like an instant bestseller, but it was Jim's advice. Every indie bookseller that I recently got to meet at a book selling event Friday was personally telling me it was one of the steadiest SFF books they had that came in. That like it comes in within a week, whatever amount that they get, and then it's sold within the next week to 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, but it's always like comes in and it goes, and it's just really steady. Like it's just been ticking along. It hasn't dipped. It's just been stupidly steady. And I credit that to his advice because that's not something I expected. I admit when I came in, and I think maybe some of us definitely thought this who are on the younger side, maybe people watching, that there's been so many changes in publishing, at least on social media. When you look, it's like either someone blows up instantly or you don't hear about them again. And then that might just be social media, the extremism of how it displays things, because it's very attention, oriented. And I thought if I didn't blow up instantly, like I was just going to fall away and, whatever, like what was it? The midlist death spiral people talk about. And it's been this quiet. Yeah. And it's been like this quietly, just, it doesn't sink. It just keeps selling, and book 1 out earned after 4 months, and we're eating into book 2, and it's just like chugging along.
Yeah.
So he's definitely right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing about when you're promoting a later book in a series, right? And I'm going through this for a book 4 right now in a series. You're really promoting 2 different things. You're promoting this book, which is, hey, everybody who's read the first one, or everyone who's read the series to this date, there is another book. You need to know about that. Yeah. And we really, and it's hard just to reach those people and let them know that it's coming. But at the same time, you're also promoting the whole series, right? You're promoting book 1 essentially all over again to a whole new group of people, because a lot of people missed it the first time it came out. It's funny because as authors, we think about the books that are coming out now and the books that are coming out this year, right? And I was watching something. This was 6 or 8 months ago, and somebody said, "Hey, there's this great new book out called The Poppy War," right? Which came out in 2018. And they were just hearing about it, and that was just instructive, though, in that there are people who have not even heard of this series who need to hear of it, right? And who want to hear of it and who are going to love it once they find it. So you're promoting book 2, but you're also promoting back to book 1, which is great because 2 sales for 1. If they read book 1 and they like it, and that just keeps on going. And when you get, so I'm promoting book 4, but I'm also promoting the whole series, and hoping to find new readers who are going to start at book 1 and eat up the first 3 just to be ready for the 4th one.
Yeah. That's well said, because that's like the struggle I was facing and didn't have words for it, right? Where it was like, I need to promote book 2, but I can't spoil it. What do I do? Oh my gosh. We got a question coming in from Jeff Brown. So congratulations, first of all. And then what alternatives to the trope charts have worked? And what have you been doing that you've learned from the booksellers? We are looking for your secrets now, Ronnie.
Oh, for me specifically, actually partnering with indie bookstores was what worked best because they already have a beat on their localized communities. And small things I did was just sending book plates. And before I got really nice ones, I was just desperate to find anything because I didn't know what would also hold the signature well. Because I had gotten some from a company and like there were these really glossy, shiny book plates that you couldn't actually write on with Sharpie, like nothing
Oh
stuck
my
to.
God, I hate
And
those.
someone
Yeah.
recommended just get sticker labels from Amazon that are matte. They're clean white book plates essentially, but they hold the signature better than anything. And I just bought these sheets of 20, like they were dirt cheap. And I just reached out on Twitter, like, hey, any indie bookstores that are interested and open, can I send you book plates? And like it was just explosive. Like I had so many people tagging their favorite indie bookstores, and they were like, "We would love to have them. We'll stick them in book one to hype up book two, and we'll keep some for book two's launch." And every single one of those stores has stayed in email contact. They've been pushing the book to their local readers, and I haven't checked today, but up until now, in email contact, it's been sounding really wonderful. They've been like a lot of people have been really curious about your book. The covers really stand out, and because this book was obviously going to be in stores, learning that was really handy for me because I don't know if this is like laziness, but they already know their community so well. Like they already service them. I'm learning to like, maybe I should just reach out to people who do this better and ask them, what can I do that is a win for both of us? Because if this sells a copy at your store, you're obviously going to get a cut and it helps me. And it's just working together. And that was the biggest one. And then the other one was booksellers telling me to either share quotes or things I enjoy about writing the book that maybe people wouldn't know about, because a lot of them, whenever I guess a bookseller learns a funny story about an author, if it's relevant enough to selling the book, they actually share that. They have conversations about like this author either came into a store, I heard this funny thing. I actually, the first time I heard a really funny story about Jim was the one you tell about going to Brazil. But I actually heard about that from a bookseller who heard it at one of your panels, which was funny because I was already a fan of your series at this time, but they were selling my friend on it in a Barnes & Noble when I was walking around. I came back to overhear the story, and it made me laugh that they cared enough in a really good way to share it to sell the book, because you wouldn't think that, but it made that friend of mine like you more, which is really funny though, because I've been trying to sell them the series myself anyways, and they didn't listen to me.
They didn't trust
but
you.
but the bookseller sold it, right? So it's like that's just really cool. Like their ability to take and I guess personalize somebody that the reader hasn't met, but I guess it creates an extra connection before they read the book. And I thought that was actually really cool, being able to share stuff about why I wrote something in the book without spoiling it, or how, and sharing maybe some powerful quotes that don't spoil stuff. Maybe it creates more of an emotional connection with the reader. Maybe it gives vibes or something. They can go like, okay, this is my kind of person, or maybe my kind of story based off of what I saw, enough to check it out.
I feel like this comment is appropriate to throw up. Your muscle car tweets is sold.
Yeah, yeah. I guess be a person. Yeah.
Oh my god, I love it.
I do talk about muscle cars a lot on Twitter, though. I'm not gonna lie, maybe a little too much for a writer.
Nothing wrong with other interests. Also, we have our first smolder mention.
Yeah.
So it begins.
See,
Oh
you invite this, Ronnie. You invite
right?
it.
I was gonna say
really
you mentioned
Well,
it.
it was the longest that
bring it
it's
up.
been without a comment. Like it was like it normally did it within the first few minutes. I was like, all right, 20 minutes. Like, okay, we did it.
Because
Yeah,
our friend
the
Mr.
28
Cahill's
minutes,
not
new
here,
record.
I think. Unless he is. I
Yeah.
haven't seen him in the studio. Oh my gosh.
Oh man.
We have another question in too about would you say that you're also promoting the genre? Is there a different way to promote different genres? I think that's a great question, because all of us are kind of so steeped in the world of SFF that we kind of forget that a lot of just regular readers don't necessarily think in genre. Like I remember talking to someone about my first book, like when it first got signed, which is quite obviously fantasy. There's magic and all this stuff. And I was describing it. And this person that was an avid reader was like, oh, so it's like science fiction. And I was like, no, but like kind of close. But yeah, so do you find like if you're trying to reach a broader audience, maybe, right? Are you trying to sell them on the genre of fantasy? I think especially since Ronnie, your Tales of Tremaine are so emblematic of this classic, traditional, incredible fantasy tradition that we have, you know?
Yeah, that's actually it's weird because like when I first started marketing it, I did just call it epic fantasy because I felt like it was the safest, most encapsulating bet of everything you could find in it. And then Tor was calling it like a Silk Road fantasy, and I was like, okay, it's also that. And someone was calling it a South Asian fantasy. I was like, okay, but it's also that, but it's also not because it's set along an entire Silk Road, and the first country you're in is actually a nod to Portugal, Spain, and Italy if they were amalgamated into one because they all had a Silk Road presence. And people don't know they traded stories and they had entire economies along the Silk Road. And I was like, so okay, it's that too. And then someone like, well, it's a heroic fantasy because you're following just one hero. And I was like, I guess it's that too, okay. And then someone's like, it's a mythic fantasy like Tolkien because you're using Greek mythology. And I'm like, is that really a genre? And I had to look at mythic fantasies one. And I'm like, I'm like, it's fantasy. There's magic and horses. If it has laser guns and laser swords, it's one thing. If it has like swords and horses, it's another.
Right. Oh, or the classic, if Carl Urban is bald with a gun, it's sci-fi. If Carl Urban has long hair and a horse, it's fantasy.
Yes.
Oh my god.
We say that now until he does an IP that blends both, and then we're ducked.
Right.
And he will do it.
Lost our whole thing.
Yeah, because he's in The Boys, which is urban fantasy. It's contemporary.
Yeah.
And he has medium length hair. You're right. It's like a short crop. Okay, so never mind. Every hair length
in the middle, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Carl
Urban's hair denotes the spectrum of fantasy and sci-fi.
It still works.
I need to make this a meme with a slider, and we can just post it tomorrow. Like, here's how you understand SF and fantasy. And that's the thing. It's just a Carl Urban metric. Just keep erasing hair along him, like those things where, what was it, like, was it the 90s or 2000s? God, I'm old. Where people would cut their face out and you would put the little different cut up hair pieces on it to see how you look.
Little magnet thing? Yeah.
You just do that with Carl Urban along the slider of SF and fantasy, and that's it. And just cut his hair and move the little face along. And as it gets closer to one side or another, you know where you are on the genre scale.
I love it. We need to make this. We'll make shirts or something with. I don't know how we make that into a shirt. A mug that's heat sensitive and his hair grows.
There you go.
Now we're talking. We need a merch store.
You could probably sell that, like at a con.
Oh, absolutely.
You had a shirt. You could absolutely sell a shirt like that at a con.
Someone would pick that up. Yeah, everyone would be wearing their the many hairs of Carl Urban shirts. Got a new question in the chat from Bo. So, what have you learned from releasing both books that you may take and apply to indie releases that you may?
Oh, wow. In releasing both books, okay, the promotion stuff. Definitely being more comfortable reaching out to people for promotion because I actually really wasn't. Because when I was indie, I never did blog tours and stuff. I wasn't really aware of them, and I focused so much on what I thought was marketing, which is ad stuff, right? Like I really learned AdSense, I learned keyword optimization, I learned all the tech nerdy data side of it at that time. Like click per cost, like what's the most efficient way I could target this ad? Sales copy that's really pitchy and blurby, which I also use something that Jim teaches, which I think he taught on SFF Addicts, the Spook. Like how can you boil down your pitch in 2 lines also to really sell to somebody? Because that's all you really get on an Amazon and a Facebook ad now. You don't get much text space. And then going here and working with Adrian to set up an actual tour with bloggers and everything, and realizing how much more exposure you get through the kindness of people who've already built up their audiences and want to share that space with you. That would be something when I do more future indie stuff, I would definitely be more comfortable now reaching out, going like, hey, if you have time, I've got so-and-so book coming out. I'd love to send you a copy. Here's the pitch, whatever the genre is, if you have space and if you feel it's up your alley. Because I'd never done that. The first time I'd gotten blog and any of this kind of stuff was with the release of book 1, but Tor coordinated all of that. So I was still kind of in the dark how to go about it. And then book 2 right now, Adrian set up all of it and he introduced me to people and he was super kind and sweet, showing me like who to reach out to and how to find bloggers and stuff. Because I came in like when indie was still like very, I guess, like poo-pooed on, and it was like the very Wild West because Amazon had some competition early on with Apple, because Apple used to pay more at one time than Amazon. And that was really it. There wasn't any really other competitors. And Apple, I guess, stopped caring or something. Amazon overtook them. And then 2015-16, there was a boom in indie publishing. Like everyone was writing urban fantasy for the money before Lit RPG came along. And then that changed everything. So there was a lot of just like, I guess, paddling to figure out the market at that time. And then shifting to traditional changed a lot for me and how to market and taught me new stuff about, like, I guess, the reviewer ecosystem and stuff out there.
Yeah. And I like that it's not so poo-pooed anymore, right? I think it's everything is the two halves of the writing sphere, the author sphere, are kind of coming together a little bit. And I think that reaching out to reviewers and bloggers, it's at least the folks that that I've met, maybe we're just meeting the cool ones, kind of are equally as excited to work with a great indie author as they are to work with a great trad author on a release, on a blog tour, on something like that. And I just love that so much.
And we're seeing like authors straddling both now too, because it allows, I've seen so many friends of mine get the opportunity from either side, whether they go indie to trad or the other way, to make more money and be more stable, because you know, Amazon shows you your monthly earnings whenever you want, and 70% royalties, and you can sell directly now to actual indie publishers, not just Audible, but they're independent, like audio houses, for example. And a lot of them pay really good money just for audio rights. So if you wanted to like dip in to have the ebook yourself, and then you can sell print to some small publishers, depending on who you are, or do it yourself now with Kickstarters. I'm seeing a lot of people like blur the lines, and it's just leading to more stability and a better ecosystem for people I care about, which I think is just really cool.
Yeah. Got a congratulations I'll throw up here.
Oh, thank you.
From our buddy with the burning questions. It says YouTube series for anyone unfamiliar. This is kind of a fun question that I think we could probably throw around roundtable. But story, world, character, where does a new story tend to begin, or where is it easiest to begin? And I'm going to say for you specifically, because I do think it's different for a lot of writers, or every writer in some way.
Yeah. Oh man, for me, believe it or not, Tales of Tremaine came out of the character first, because Ari wasn't even Ari. He was a backup character in a standalone fantasy I wanted to write, just called The Storyteller, who was kind of going to be part a nod to like the character lurking in the tavern in the back. You remember the scene? I'll use the visual adaptations of Lord of the Rings with Aragorn sitting in the back, all like menacing with the hood up.
And, I thought of when you said
that. Here he's trying to. I was going to have Ari quite literally being the dour, brooding storyteller sitting in the corner, and there's going to be a conversation in where he brings up, kind of cockily as a bard and a performer would be, how many stories he's collected, some of his adventures within this series about another character, about like how he's just as amazing and done all these things. And he started taking a life of his own as a bardic storyteller would, and kind of stole the scene. And I was like, I could do something with this. And I was actually encouraged by Jim. There's an old Facebook post where I started talking about I wanted to tell a story about storytelling and make it this giant love letter to stuff. And I kind of thought it was stupid at the time. And he was like, if you just do the best job you can, I promise you it will sell, which is what that last part of the dedication was. That came many years later after he saved my life. And it was the idea of just, I think he related the story of how Dresden came about. And he just worked really hard in his craft. And then I think people have heard the story, which you tell better, but it worked out for you. And I was like, okay, so I'll just shut up and listen to the advice. He hasn't steered me wrong yet. And I'll just write this love letter to storytelling, and I'll work on my craft. And then it did end up selling traditional, which I did not expect, because it was being written specifically as an indie story at the time. I was going to serialize it on Patreon maybe and treat it like the old radio plays, because there was a storyteller. So I was like, this week, you have Ari going through this part of the adventure. There's going to be an infinitely serialized, like, wandering storyteller going through the main body of the story I already had. And then Audible was interested, and I bumped into a tour editor who was hungover at a convention, and I didn't know he was a tour editor. I was talking to somebody who worked on Shadowrun and Battletech, because I'm huge fans of those IPs. I really love Shadowrun, and he had invited this editor over, and we were just talking nerdy stuff. We geeked out about Dresden, Wheel of Time, and at the end of the interview, the end of the conversation, he asked, like, what are you working on? And I told him about Tales of Tremaine, and I led with the character. I gave him snippets of what Ari had done, what he had claimed to do, and I read some of his voice to him, and he's like, send me the sample of this. And I was like, why? He's like, I work at Tor. And I was like, I don't have an agent. And his words were, if I like this, you can go pick your agent. And then he just got up and left. And I was like, okay, I'm not hearing back from him, but sure. And I emailed it to him.
What a baller exit line.
Yeah. And a month later, I hear back from him. And he's like, do you have time for a phone call? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, yeah, so Tor wants to buy all 3 books. And I was like, I was unprepared for this. And he's like, yeah, you have some thinking to do. Bye. I was like, okay.
Like, thank you.
But it all started with character.
No big deal.
Yeah. Like, that's not how it's supposed to work. You don't meet like your editor at a convention who's hungover, but
you do, though.
Apparently, yes.
Oh my god, I like it. What about Michael, Jim, either of you, where does the story
Yeah.
tend to start for you? Character, worlds, the plot?
Well, I think genre is kind of almost a given if you're working on contract, because that's probably in the contract, and you might not have even have started to dream the book up yet. So you don't. I don't think it starts there, but it might actually, from a very legal perspective, it probably does. But for me, it can be anything, right? The plan. I mean, everything about my Planet Side series, everybody would say it's character driven, right? It's the Carl Butler series. It's about the guy, but he didn't come first. The world came first, because I dreamed the world up while I was sitting in Afghanistan on Kandahar Air Base. And the command structure at Kandahar Air Base was kind of messy, right? And you had an Air Force element, you had a medical element, you had a Army element, you had a Special Forces element, and that became Kappa Base and Planet Side. And it worked in Afghanistan because we're all on the same team and we're all professionals. But while I was sitting there, I was like, what if we weren't? And that became, what if we weren't? So I just took the command structure of Kandahar Air Base and I made everybody dicks, right? And they all hated each other and they didn't want to work together and they fought with each other about every little thing that they were going to do. And that became the world that this story was going to exist in. And I didn't even know it turned into a missing person story. It wasn't when I dreamed up the world. In fact, I was in Afghanistan and I just wrote myself like maybe a page and a half of notes. And then I put the character with it. When the character came, I'm like, okay, here's the guy who goes in this world. And the character came from reading Gillian Flynn. Of all things, I was reading Gone Girl. And it just opens in the first chapter with this first person voice that's just phenomenal, right? He's got this voice. And I'm like, that's it. That's the voice that I got to use here. And then so it became first. I'd never written in first person before. And then I read that and I was like, okay, that's the story. And it goes in this setting. And that's how it became what it is.
Yeah, the pieces start to come together. What about you, Jim?
Statistically speaking, apparently I begin my stories with shooting my mouth off in arguments on the internet. That's where they come from. Although more recently it's been more about the story world, I think is usually what really draws me in first. It's when I come up with this world and then I can't stop going there to visit in my spare moments. It's like, oh, I should probably start writing this before I lose my mind. So,
yeah, I love it. That's kind
get
of
paid
how
for
I am
it,
too.
yeah.
It's world. Yeah. World for me too, but it's kind of like what Mike said, right? Or it's like it starts in one area, but I think they all bleed together very early in the process. For me, at least, it'll start with world, and then I'll start, coming up with characters that belong in that world, and then a little plot sneaks in, and it's always kind of hard to. It becomes a chicken and egg thing for me sometimes, where I try to chase it back to the beginning, and I'm like, oh, I don't actually remember which one was first, which is kind of fun. See, we do have another audience question for you, Ronnie. So what lessons have you learned within your writing world? Or maybe I'm going to open this up and say publishing world too, because I think there's a lot of really fun lessons to be learned in the publishing world that you can apply to your life in general. And there's kind of like a back and forth here too of, how does that feed back into your writing?
Well, something that I probably still need to get better with, and publishing has taught me a lot of, and I guess the writing world is patience. I don't know if it's ADHD or being young or something, but I've always been like, think quick, talk quick, move quick, get stuff done. I'm really good at like getting into work mode and just working and grinding. Traditional publishing especially is slow, and I've been told that before by more mature authors and mentors before, but I didn't know what slow meant, because like if you move really fast, if you're flash fast, even a little bit slower is slow. You're like, okay. And then I got to traditional publishing, and slow has been redefined. What's the line like from Jabba that gets translated about like how slow you'll learn pain and suffering in the pit of the Sarlacc stomach when you're digested over a million years? It feels like it's that slow at times to me.
That. Yeah, I just remember I saw a tweet when I was, I think I was still querying at the time, like it's a long time ago, but it was from Eric Smith, the agent, where it said, in publishing, we don't work in business days, We work in
Yeah.
business months.
Yeah, that sounds applicable.
3 to
And
6 business months.
I have finished entire books and have samples of books, and it's like for example, my contract, I can't sell anything until X part of whatever is fulfilled. Like I think they have to look at like part of book 3 or whatever, and it's like, okay, but I'm like, I write fast. This is what I do. I like this. I have other books done. Can I do stuff? I'm like, no. I'm like, can you guys be faster? They're like, no. It's like, I need to learn to be patient. That is definitely the big one, and I know that like I'm still working on it. I can admit I'm not great with that. It's easier for me to get back into work mode.
But then the good news is you'll have projects, because like I came out of once Thick as Thieves came out, I had 4 books fully drafted because it took so fucking long.
Yeah,
to
yeah,
get those 2 out, so you'll be out of the game.
yeah.
You're
There is
great.
that. Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
What about,
Oh,
are there
and
any other, like, what about writing wise? Any specific writing skills or lessons you've learned that you've been able to apply outside of writing?
With Tales of Tremaine, I'm not sure. It's a lot heavier lyrical prose, but a lot of that has been the opposite. It's been stuff life's taught me that's gone into the writing instead. The actual writing of it was stuff I've been very fortunate to learn from other people too. Like Jim, a lot of it that came down to working on the book was just discipline because of the size of it, and that made it a lot easier to finish such a big chunky book on time. Just treating it like the earlier I start, even if I write fewer words a day, they add up by the time I can maybe I have a good month and I can really muscle up to nail out bigger word count. But it feels like a lot more like the book is more of a byproduct of stuff from life than what I'm getting out of the book back, if that makes sense. At least in terms of the writing and publishing stuff, right? There's physical stuff along the journey, I guess. Like I'm adjusting to people's reactions and finding out that people really, really enjoy the book. That's less to do with, writing skills and more, I guess, other aspects of the career that I didn't understand before. The levels of parasocial relationship and engagement in the field like this. Being indie for the longest time, a lot of that interaction was, closer to Facebook and maybe people I even knew. And now I'm seeing a different side in the larger side of fandom, for example, which is interesting to deal with. And I'm having to learn from that, which is still writing and publishing affiliated. It's just not necessarily in creating the book, I guess.
Yeah. I always feel like writing and publishing have so many different, completely disparate skill sets that you really have to be good at all of them to survive, which is challenging. So yeah, even if it's not directly related to one piece, if you can tuck it into another piece of the author puzzle, I say it more than counts. Awesome. Well, I don't have any other questions in the chat at the moment, so I'm going to ask one of my questions because I find it fun to get to know my things that I want to know. So I want to talk about your characters a little bit, Ronnie, because the characters are so wonderful in the Tales of Tremaine, and I want to know like which character for you, and I'm going to say other than Ari, because Ari is an obvious choice and he's your POV. What character is the most fun to write scenes with? Like, who do you like doing dialogue for the most outside of Ari?
Okay, specifically for dialogue, it would probably be Krisham, who doesn't get a lot of screen time in book 1. In book 2, he gets a lot. And for people who need a refresher, he's a character who's locked up in what's known as a crow's nest, which is sort of like a mental asylum for really ill students, because the magic system in this world is based off of your faith or belief. And it's one of those where what you believe can also affect you back, just like in real life. So when you add magic to that, it's like steroids. And Krishna, unfortunately, suffers from a sort of magically afflicted case of DID, or dissociative identity disorder, because he was someone who struggled very on to believe he could do the certain magics in the world. And he taught himself what he thought was a hack of, what if I impersonate legendary characters who pulled this off? What if I convince myself I'm pretending to be like them? Because they could do the magic. And it sort of worked until his magic kept going and going, and he kept building on it and had to rely on the personas, to the fact where now he actually has moments of thinking he is genuine those people. He acts like them, loses consciousness, and he's, at least on the outside, very erratic. But the more you see him, there are a lot of background clues of why he's the only person who's not locked up, even though he's in that place. Why does he sit at the front of it and he's the only one with some freedom? And I'm writing actually a touching story on the side from his POV. And this is spoilers, not spoilers, where you learn it's because he's the one most capable of taking care of everyone else in the crow's nest who's worse off than him. His multiple personalities actually allow him to sort of understand what other people are going through when he's more conscious in his own. But from the outside with Ari, it looks like he's just only crazy, and he's like really erratic, and he's jumping like, you know, with swords that he shouldn't have in a place where like students are locked up. It's like, where did you get that? And he completely will avoid the question. He's just like slashing and fighting a shadow on the wall. He looks like he's just nuts, and you realize he's a really complex, fun character who's got his own thing going on. And then he has these pockets of wisdom because he's an older student who's gone through a lot, and he can kind of humble Ari, which I thought was really nice because Ari thinks he's got his act together, and you know, a lot of people at that age don't, but they think they do. The confidence of youth, right? And he can get kind of humbled by somebody who him looks like they're way more erratic, and he's like, it's just a good way to like take him down a notch. I thought that was fun. And the other character who I don't know if it counts as dialogue, but is Ari's cat Shola, because there's clearly interactions with them. I don't have straight dialogue, but you know, I write like a morale or a merc, and then I have a whole thing of like what that translates to as Ari understands it as a cat owner. And the interactions between them were some of my favorite to write because the cat has the best ego in the world. He's clearly the most important thing in the world. I wrote a short story for a dear friend of Jim and I, LJ Hackmeister, who is a brilliant, wonderful person. She did a animal charity anthology, which raised like 70 grand for animals. And I wrote it from the POV of Ari's cat. And you realize in his head, he can communicate. He can communicate effectively. People are just too stupid to understand him. And that was a really fun story to write about like how the whole point of being a cat is being patient with the limited faculties of humans who don't understand the complexity of how they make all those like sublingual guttural sounds and how complex their language is and how stupid humans are and how clumsy they are and how they're just trying to like keep us together. And that's why we really feed and take care of them. It's because they think that's all we're good enough at. So it's like they're giving us a baby task. It's like they won't hurt themselves doing this. And I'm hoping after that story, more people read it and find it, they can come back to the main body series and have that appreciation for the interactions with the cat now. Because that's really what's going on. Like those are those dialogues, even in the story, as few as they might be compared to the short story. The cat is going on all these important, extremely wise tangents for Ari. And Ari's like, yeah, I know, it's dinner time. The cat's looking at him like, no, you're stupid. This is what you need to do. And all that's there in the visual cues is just, he can't understand cat.
He can't understand him. We're getting some love for Shola in the chat.
Yeah.
So, and just
everybody likes cats, right?
Throwing it in. Shola's the best cat. And some love for the short story here. So, if you guys haven't checked out the short story about Shola, go check it out. I think when I finished reading, was it Doors of Midnight? It was one of the two books.
Yeah.
I DM'd you, Ronnie, and was like, you need Shola merch. I need a Shola sweatshirt.
Yes. I need the cat merch so bad. I need to do something about that at some point.
Right? Pins, something. I say this cat lady needs some Shola merch in her life. I like that. And I love how you do that with Shola, but also with I'm terrible with names at the best of times. But the friend that played the bard friend, basically.
Roddy, yeah. He communicates through music.
Yes, you give like a personification to the notes that he plays oftentimes.
I actually got that, believe it or not, from Slash, where if you ever watch him in interviews, he fiddles in plein air with his hands. And I don't know if it's anxiety or something, but I think he's just so used to having a guitar to like fiddle with. And that makes sense. He's Slash, right? And I thought it'd be a really cool communicative way to show somebody with that, because Roddy, as you learn more, actually has generalized anxiety, and it goes away when he performs, which is why he's always fiddling with his mandolin. He actually has, it's like a fidget cube for him. And that's why at times he'll play his voice instead through the music. He'll play somber notes instead of saying something. Like there's a lot of neurodivergent characters in there because something also Jim told me, which I've taken to heart in the series, is that if you've gone through stuff in life, and a lot of times writers will process this in their writing, you're also writing or communicating in a language that maybe not everybody understands, but people who've gone through that will understand. So a lot of the stuff that either I've understood through friends with neurodivergency and issues, or I've gone through myself, shows up in my characters in the hopes that I guess other people see themselves in it, especially because it's part of this is a magical academy. Youth can be rough for a lot of people, especially as they're developing and they're going through stuff, that also gets exacerbated by mental health issues. Every one of my characters in the past sort of has that because they're also awkward kids, right? They're going through life. And I wanted to give them things that made them more unique, that also added to the story. But I thought were also like touching and more unique, I guess, maybe not outlets, just, I don't want to say ticks either, but you know what I mean? They just have these extra little facets about them and how they might act or communicate that those people going through that will understand. At least they'll see that and go, I know what that is. But they might do it with something else, or maybe they do have a fidget cube. Maybe they stress pull a zipper, or they chew on the end of like the hoodie anklet thing that they have. So there's a lot of that in the series, and Rodney does use it to communicate at times when he feels he can't get the words out himself.
Yeah. I like that about communicating specifically to an audience. It kind of brings back the conversation of like representation, right? Where it's like, yeah, it doesn't have to be for everyone. And in fact, if you're writing something for everyone, you're writing it for no one. But if you're speaking to people that, you know, have a certain shared experience with you, it's that authenticity and that kind of genuine nature of the work that is what makes the art shine. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. So we did have a question about where we can get the short story, but another lovely chatter has answered that. So there we go. Thank you to the chat for being lovely on both fronts. So there you go. If you guys want to pick up that short story about Shola, it's in an anthology.
And there's also a really great, I believe you did a mouse story in that, right, sir? I think that one. Yeah.
The Mouse Kerberos team up story.
Yes.
A cat story, a mouse story. What else could we want out of life? Let's be real. I mean, honestly, I'm here for it. Sweet. Well, we're kind of wrapping up a little bit here. So if anyone has any last questions, make sure you pop those in the chat. But let's, I'll just ask for me, what are you working on next, Ronnie? I mean, I'm guessing Tales of Tremaine 3.
Yeah, that on paper, because my actually weirdest month ever, my main writing computer exploded on August 1st, where there was a systemic failure of the water pump, the CPU, the motherboard, and the graphics card all at once. The entire rig.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah. So I literally have an Amazon boxer with a new graphics card that just came in before the interview started. All the pieces are coming in, but I've been handwriting on Tales of Tremaine 3 and writing between a phone and a tablet on a short story IO for Jim's next urban fantasy anthology, which is going to be from my Grave Report urban fantasy series. I've got a fun little story about parts of West Virginia because I don't see enough stories happening there, and it's a really beautiful area. And I thought the ecosystem there, for a very mining-heavy part of America, I could do some really cool stuff with mythology because there are mine-specific myths, both from the old world, especially Europe, that came over, and then localized American folklore. And I thought that was something really beautiful I could do because part of my whole love for that series was born out of both Dresden and Supernatural because I was really young at the time both of them came out. So it was like this perfect overlap of I get to write first-person detective stuff, and I also get to tackle beautiful mythology around the world, especially in America.
Very cool. I love that you're returning to the Grave Report
thank you.
series. I think a lot of people are going to be excited to see that. And I'm excited from your friend perspective because it could introduce that series to a whole bunch of new people who haven't seen it yet. And
that's a good point.
Sales, baby.
That's a good point too. Yes. I didn't think about that, but yeah.
It's a win-win for everybody. I love it. Oh, we have a question in the chat for the group, actually. So for all of us, who's your favorite character to write? And I'm going to throw it to Ronnie, too, because I'll just throw it for all of your books. Everything you've ever worked on. Who is your favorite character you've ever written? And then we'll all answer.
Oh, man. For me, it's probably still going to be Vincent Graves because that was the first story that I wrote after I got the piece of advice from Jim saving my life in 2011. And there's obviously, like I said, because it was a first-person detective urban fantasy series, a lot of love in there for Dresden because it introduced me to a blend of stuff within the series I didn't think possible at the time. Because growing up, I had seen mythology very compartmentalized as mythology, and fiction was very clearly sci-fi or fantasy that I was introduced to in the 90s. Right, there was a very clear line of, you know, you have your military sci-fi, which is still sci-fi. You have Stargate, you got Star Trek, Star Wars, which I didn't even know space fantasy was a thing. It was just sci-fi to me. And then there was like Legends of the Beastmaster in the 90s, and Xena and Hercules and Tolkien and Robert Jordan. And then I read Dresden, and it was the first thing where I saw fantastical elements in a very understandable contemporary setting with stuff that my mother introduced me to. She read a lot of more, I guess, mainstream, you know, like mystery detective books that were more available in Asia. Like, you know, you had Lee Child's thriller series, you had Raymond Chandler and all the old stuff. And I recognize this beautiful blend of like everything I grew up with, but in one encapsulated series. And I'd never seen anything like that before. Because Buffy, and maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but Buffy came out after the books. At least the way I was introduced to them, I didn't know about Buffy until at least book 1 and book 2. already existed. And so it was just this really cool mash of everything. And then I saw pop culture following that. So like it couldn't help but not shape me. Like it absolutely cultured everything for me. So that was the first voice I ever got published in. So it feels like it's a culmination of like a lot of stuff growing up, and including stuff that's happened since. Like it feels really good to go back to that voice. I maybe it's just I'm not nostalgic for it. I'm putting too much emotion into it, but it means a lot to me.
Yeah, I don't think you can put too much emotion into it. I think that it's only going to make it more authentic, and that's going to make it resonate with the readers. And I love it. Yeah, perfect. What about Michael? Jim, who's your favorite character to write from your projects?
I think my favorite character, it's really weird because I think the obvious answer will be Carl Butler because it's the one I've written the most. But I think the favorite character I've ever written was probably Gastowski from The Misfit Soldier, which nobody's read, you know, and like it's my least selling book. But I just really, really loved writing him. And I really wish that book had done better so I could have written the sequel that I have plotted out. Just because I enjoy, because he's lying to you, right? And he tells you in the first chapter that he's lying to you. He says, because he's a con man. That's his job, right? It's a heist book. He's a con man, and he tells you right from the start that you're going to believe what you want to believe, and I'm going to let you, right? I'm going to tell you things that you want to believe because people want to believe certain things, and if you tell them what they want to believe, then they're gonna hear it, right? And he uses that to basically con the reader, as well as the the antagonists in the story, and it was just a ton of fun to write. Plus he's just an idiot, right? Like he's a much younger character. Carl Butler's an older guy. He has some wisdom to him. He's got some sardonic, some humor to him, and he's fun. But Gastowski's like 22, and he has nothing.
We're all done at that age, yeah.
Right? He's figured out the next 4 minutes of his life, and that two of those are wrong. And he's just a lot of fun. He's just a lot of fun to write.
What's scary is you called him young, and I'm like, I think I'm.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to feel though if some of us are closer to his age than Carl Butler's age though? Because you call him like young and without wisdom, and like isn't Carl like a retired colonel? So he's like 50 something.
Carl's a weird age, right? Because he spent a whole bunch of time in cryo freezing. So he's like organically 60. I had to figure it out for book 5 because it comes into play. So he's like organically, he was born 60 years ago, but he's organically only 46 because I'm
still closer to the younger guy than him.
He's been frozen for 14 years at various points, in like 6 to 9 month increments along the way.
Got it. All that just to say you're dumb, Ronnie.
Ronnie. Let's just own it. We're young and dumb.
Yeah.
I'm here for it.
That's what I was getting with that. But yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Oh my gosh, but Michael, that sounds.
Brother, you're not 22.
Not yet read Misfit Soldier.
I'm closer to that. I said than Butler's age, but yes, yeah.
We can pretend we're still 22.
No. Wait, did you say you read Misfit Soldier?
Yeah, I read Misfit Soldier. I need to read it. That has like your pitch there, or whatever your description just sold me to the moon and back. I've written on my sticky note now. So everyone out there, go buy it and read it because it sounds dope.
Go buy it so I can write the second one.
And 2 are wrong. That's brilliant.
Yes, I know. I love that.
I should have used that for the pitch. I really should have used that for a pitch.
You should. Never too late.
Oh no, my publisher has told me it's much too late. they don't ever want to see that again.
A sub question here. If you could write and publish Misfit Soldier 2 as on Kickstarter or something. So who knows, right?
I write for money. So no.
You're like about that. Not so much. Jim, who's your favorite character that you've ever written?
It changes based on my mood. I really love writing characters who are allies and aliens. It's an ally, but it's somebody who is not at all like you. So, I saw that I can be writing these conversations where you talk about things that are important to, the one character who's more or less a regular person. But the alien doesn't have the same point of view, and they have to ask questions, and they have to, they have to wonder about what's going on. So I love writing Mav. I regard Marcone as one of those characters. Ambassador Varg from the Alera books. He was, because he's somebody who's your ally, but he's a 9-foot tall werewolf. He's gonna have a different point of view on things than you are. So.
I love it. If I had to pick, I think from my published works so far, I think my favorite is Nash. She's my like smuggler sailor character. But also Raya's really fun just because she's so done with everyone's shit always. Which is really fun. Yeah. Awesome. So to kind of fully wind us down, because I think that's the last question we have from the chat here. Ronnie, what is the most, if you had to pick like the most rewarding part of your like author journey so far, like if there's a moment that like an interaction with somebody or a review or something that like just gave you the warm fuzzies and something you come back to, what is that moment for you?
I know what it is, but I don't want to embarrass anybody here. But somebody obviously I looked up for most of my life telling me they were proud of me when certain stuff happened in my career. It's not hard to guess who it is, but I don't want to embarrass anybody. But
3 guesses, everyone.
Yeah, the first 2 don't count because you don't need that many. But that was arguably the most important moment because I wouldn't be here without them, like literally and career wise. I wouldn't have done a lot of the decisions because I was definitely stepping into I guess unknown waters, right? Like transitioning to traditional writing certain books outside of when at the time I had started making at least a name as far as I thought I could make one with urban fantasy. I was very, very niched in that within indie publishing for a while. Like that was all I was doing. Even my spin-off books were urban fantasy, and that's kind of what I was just getting known as. And I took what I thought was big risk to write something that just meant a lot to me, and I didn't expect it doing this well enough to gone that far. And every metric along the way keeps it's working out. Which has always been kind of a scary idea. Like, does it work out and how? That's something I'm really bad at. Is I guess Mike and Jim know this better, but like I can't let go of the how things work out for. Like, how does this happen? And I notice as people get older, they care less about how it's like it's life. Like you're not going to figure out how but it works out or something. And yeah, so it would definitely be that moment though. Hearing that he was proud of me.
I love that.
Yeah, still am. You continue to do well. I'm very pleased.
And I gotta go get that lotto ticket.
Yeah, go get that lotto ticket. And I think that I heard Jim say that you're splitting it with all 4 of us, is what I think I heard him say, right?
He might have said that.
I may be, I may be paraphrasing.
How stories evolve as they get retold, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we're
perfectly on theme.
Truth being
that's right
kind of
a
transient thing. Yes. Perfect. Well, that is going to do it for our lovely chat here. Congratulations once again, Ronnie, for the Doors of Midnight launch today. Everyone go out there or go and get it. If you haven't picked it up yet, what are you doing? Go get it. It's awesome. The cover is gorgeous. And, if you haven't read the first binding yet, double. What are you doing? Go get it. The cover is also gorgeous and it's great. Everyone, if we want to go around and just say like where you can find online, just as our normal chat, we'll end with you, Ronnie. We'll let you be the the final. So Jim, we'll start with you. If people are looking for you online, where can they find you?
You can find me at Jim Butcher online. Google search will probably get you. I think I'm the famousest of the Jim Butchers. There's several. There's like a fisherman and a jazz singer and some others. But that's okay. But you'll be able to find me with the Google or at Longshot Author on X. I guess it's X now.
Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah,
I know. I never call it
Twitter. Come on, it's Twitter.
I always call it Twitter. I know. I screw up every time.
I am also probably the most famous Michael Mammay. So you could just Google me and it'll all come right up, right? It does. It's harder to be. It's probably harder to be the most famous Jim Butcher than me because there's only 2.
Maybe.
There's only 2, me and my cousin, and and he does it right. So yeah. So But I'm Michael Mammay at everything. Twitter, michaelmammay.com is my website. You could find information out about my books. That's a year out of date if you want to go there because I haven't updated it in probably that long. So, and I got a book coming out in September, so hopefully that comes up first when you do your search.
There we go. We're just gonna test the SEO of
It's horrible.
Michael's website
The book
here.
is called Dark Side. It is the worst SEO title ever. Like everything coming, you're gonna get Pink Floyd before you get me.
Pink Floyd, yeah, Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh my gosh.
You just need to come out with a book just called Sci-Fi Book. You show up
Just
for
called
everybody,
Sci-Fi
or
Book.
not at all.
Dude, I did that with Generationship. I titled a book Generationship.
Yeah, the genre,
and no
yeah.
one had used it. My editor was, because that was a working title, and my editor was like, has that, is there a book? And there's like one indie book that has like 2 ratings on Goodreads is the only other book with that title. And I'm like, well, if someone looks up and they say, hey, I want a book about a generationship, mine's going to come up. So
yeah, there you go.
So,
that's brilliant. I love that.
There.
Next book, the fantasy book by me.
By R.R. Virdi. Yeah. Ronnie, where can we find you online? Where can we pick up the book?
Obviously Google's going to work for me too, because I'm the only R.R. Virdi. I don't have anyone to compete with. Thankfully, no one's used my name. It's not a common name. Right now, I guess the best place to pick this up would be, I guess I said Amazon, indie bookstores. There's also going to be a public sale pretty soon for the special edition of this, the Broken Binding edition, which I actually just got my copy today. So that's why I'm like touching it and like fawning over it, looking at it, because I actually haven't gotten to see it yet. But Broken Binding, which is super sweet, very lovely independent bookstore in the UK, did special editions for this, and they support like traditional and indie authors. They do like limited production runs for anyone who doesn't know like their book. They rip off the hardcovers and they redo them, like leather bound cover underneath this, symbols and papers and everything. They're really sweet, and they've been just super generously kind to me. They've been supporting me since book 1 came out. And yeah, the book's available everywhere in stores. I'm most active on Twitter, though. I do tweet a lot, probably more than I should. Like that person said, like there's a lot of car stuff. There's a lot. Like my best friend just got new cars, and I'm going to be working on them and just flooding Twitter with it. So.
And your handle is RR Virdi on there, yeah?
Oh yeah, oops. Yeah, just at RR Virdi.
Okay.
On everything.
Awesome. Yeah. Perfect. And you can find me at MJ Kuhn Books across all the socials. You can find the podcast, SFF Addicts, which we kind of mentioned a little bit, at SFF Addicts Pod across all the socials. And there we go. That wraps up our lovely launch for Doors of Midnight. Thank you guys, everybody, for being here.
Thank you so much, everybody.
The listeners and everyone in the chat, and Jim and Michael, all of you, and Ronnie.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Bye, guys.
Night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.